Okay, let's explore this problem that deals with Heaton Company, and we're going to be comparing variable costing to absorption costing on this problem. So the problem is on the left here. During Heaton Company's first 2 years, the company reported absorption costing net operating income as follows, and you see how they produced this, right? Sales were $25 per unit, cost of goods sold was $18. We subtract that from sales, we get gross margin, and then selling and administrative expenses were what you appear here, $210 and $230. So one of the questions we want to find out is, or understand, is why is cost of goods sold $18? Well, they tell us that it was direct materials of $4, then $7 for direct labor, then variable manufacturing overhead of $1, and $6 of fixed manufacturing overhead. And they tell us, looks like they had $270,000 and they sold 45,000 units, and that's what they're using as their basis for their absorption costing product cost, which totals 18 bucks. Okay, they also let us know that 40% of fixed manufacturing overhead consists of wages and salaries, and the remainder is depreciation charges. And sure enough, the units produced were the same in both years, which is why we could divide some dollar amount by 45,000 units and not worry about each year, because the units produced were the same in each year. Now the units sold were slightly different. Okay, now if you had to produce this as a variable costing income statement, what you get is over here. You get the same sales, $1 million and $1,250,000 as you had under absorption, but now you've got to break out your variable cost into variable cost of goods sold and variable selling and administrative. Well, the variable cost of goods sold is simply the direct material, the labor, and the overhead, right? The 471 here that we had here. So we get $12 times the number of units sold, and we come up with 480 and 600,000. The variable selling and administrative, though, has to be considered, and that's $2 per unit. Okay, they tell us that $2 per unit is variable, 130 is fixed. So the $2 winds up top, the 130 winds up down below, and fixed manufacturing overhead has to wind up below as well. And what I mean by up top is the variable expenses, below is the fixed expenses. Okay, so that's how we would take an absorption costing income statement for the first 2 years and then restate it under variable costing. Okay, now I've dropped this little object you see here. I'll move it so you can see what I'm focused on. Right on the middle bottom of your screen. This is a reconciliation of variable costing and absorption costing net operating incomes. So if we start with variable costing, we had 40 and 150. Those are those numbers right here. And if I call this a bridge chart. How do we get from one point to the other? And we want to go from variable to absorption, we have to end with 70 and 120. Okay, so that difference has to be either an addition or reduction of fixed manufacturing overhead that was either deferred or released from inventory on absorption costing. Okay, so that's what the difference is. Now let me slide that up and get some more support for that number. Let me say support for those numbers, the 30,000 positive fixed manufacturing overhead deferred in and the 30,000 released from inventory. Okay, now I've put this little reconciliation box that explains why we had a 30,000 positive adjustment in year one here and a 30,000 negative. Remember that in units and beginning inventory, we start off with 0. We produced 45 and sold 40, so we had 5,000 in ending inventory. That becomes the next year's beginning. Then we produced 45 and sold 50, so we had none in ending inventory. So what essentially we're doing is we're recognizing the timing of the fixed manufacturing overhead and ending inventory and beginning inventory differently under variable versus absorption costing. So, okay, so 5,000 times the $6 fixed manufacturing overhead per unit with the 5,000 swing in units winds up with a 30,000 adjustment one direction in year one, and then it swings in the other direction in year two. Okay, and this is just a brief problem that illustrates the difference between absorption costing and variable costing, and then we provide a reconciliation as to why we had differences in net operating income between the two.